Welcome to Classical Education, a podcast for those who believe in rediscovering the art of asking questions, engaging in conversation, and attending to the ideas at the heart of well-ordered teaching and learning. Adrian Freese and Trae Bailey invite you to join them on a journey in pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful, as we participate in the great conversation and listen to the many voices coming from the world of classical education. Today, I am delighted to welcome Sean Johnson. Sean is someone who has recently become a friend. If I remember correctly, we first met Sean at a summer conference that was put on by the Circe Institute. But I actually was familiar, at least with your name and some of your work, by reading some of the things that you have contributed to the Circe Institute, as well as a magazine that you are contributed to that I subscribe to, put out by Circe by the name of FORMA. And so when I got the opportunity to actually meet Mr. Johnson in the flesh and to spend some time with him, I jumped at that opportunity, and I just found him to be just as articulate and delightful and humane as he is in his writing. So Sean, welcome to the conversation.
Well, I'm glad to be here. You do me too much credit, probably, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, there are so many wonderful things that we have lined up to talk about. Before we jump into the meat of our conversation, I'd like to just tell our listeners a bit about your biography, I suppose, and some of the things that you've done that have brought you to this point in your life.
Sure.
My understanding is that you grew up in Oregon, but you currently reside in Richmond, Virginia.
That's right.
Where you teach at Veritas School, and you teach great books there. And perhaps over the course of our conversation, you can tell us a bit about some of the classes you've taught and some of those great books you've been able to read with your students. And you hold a BA in the liberal arts from New St. Andrews College and an MA in English from the University of Dallas.
That's right.
And as I mentioned before, you are a contributor to the FORMA journal, which I encourage people to look into your work there. And I understand that you have a ongoing dream of one day running a food truck with your wife and 4 children.
Yeah, I came very close to going to culinary school instead of college. And I realized that would have put a hamper on a lot of other dreams and aspirations that I had, but I still love to cook. And as I'm sure we'll probably talk about, food is pretty important to our family life. So yeah, one day.
Well, food is actually the first topic that I wanted to broach with you, because at this conference that I mentioned before, you spoke, and I'd like to read an excerpt from the description that's listed there on the Circe website. If anyone's interested after this conversation, going back and listening to your talk, it's available through their website. You can, I think for a few bucks, you can get the download, and I highly recommend people follow up and listen to that. But just as a means of opening up our conversation here, I'm going to read an excerpt from the description, and perhaps this will be a way for us to launch into our conversation.
Right.
St. John declares that the Father has given all things into Christ's hands, while St. Paul tells us we are Christ co-heirs. But in an age of boutique entertainment, specialized diets, and vain dissipation, all things can be a hard pill to swallow. We don't want to affirm the goodness of God's world, our birthright, if that includes dissenting opinions on the radio, Brussels sprouts, or a Regency novel about manners. A proper preparation for glory, then, means putting pickiness to death, replacing it with taste, and stretching the soul until it is large enough to embrace the whole cosmos, end quote. And as I remember listening to your talk, you talked about pickiness, and of course you're using you're using a word that we often use when we're talking about, thinking about food and the pickiness surrounding, what people like or don't like. And then you talked about the importance of taste. So I just wonder if you could give us a bit of an appetizer, let's say. Sorry for the puns. Classic dad jokes here. Maybe just talk to our listeners a bit about what you were doing in that talk. And this will be a good way for us to get into how your love of food has informed your own work as a teacher.
Yeah. The title of that talk was something like "The Devil Loves a Picky Eater," and I wanted to talk about how we live in this age where we're almost encouraged to cultivate a kind of pickiness, where everybody, the world is a buffet. If you don't like one grocery store, there are 12 others, and they all do something a little bit different. And everybody, there are even soap and toothpaste you can special order on the internet to get just the right kind to suit your preferences. And though some of those things might be benign, the spirit of it all seems to be a rejection of more thing than an embrace of things. We pick our particular favorites at the expense of everything else, and that translates into the dinner table. I talk about in the talk. I mention the way you treat picky children at a dinner table. What that translates into often is that we shrink our capacity to enjoy and be thankful for so many good things because we begin to idolize these preferences and favorites that we have. And that's easily seen also in the realm of education, where the modern student often has cultivated favorite forms of entertainment or pastimes or dissipations that have shrunk their ability to enjoy a lot of the good things that you're laying on the table before them. I always think of C.S. Lewis in The Weight of Glory. He talks about the boy who would rather make mud pies in the slums than go on a holiday to the seaside because he doesn't know how great that thing is. And he's come to love this lesser thing at the expense of all better things.
I could see how one would be quite stunted, or as you said, the palate sort of shrinks so that one wouldn't even be able to appreciate necessarily in the same way something if they weren't open and ready to receive it. I'm reminded again of something that I think a story I heard on a podcast. Angelina Stanford tells a story about when she was a child, how she developed a real obsession with candy and different sweet things, and her father tried to persuade her that carrots were actually very sweet, and she just wouldn't believe it, and mainly because she had the evidence of her own taste buds that were telling her the opposite. And of course, it wasn't until she broke that addiction, I suppose, and kind of rewired her taste buds a bit, that she could really taste the true sweetness of carrots. There has to be some ways in which what you do in the kitchen informs what you do in the classroom. And I just wonder if you could maybe make some connections for us between, perhaps what you see going on in the realm of food prep and the serving of a meal or the laying out of a feast, let's say, and what we're called to do and be in the classroom as teachers.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the experience of providing basic sustenance for my own children too. The Socrates in the Republic at one point, he defines education as, or at least he says the object of education, the aim of education is to teach us to love what is beautiful. And so going back to some of our earlier comments about taste and pickiness, that at home, even before we can show our children a painting by Rembrandt and have it mean anything to them, we give them food day in and day out, and so that's one of the natural places for us, thinking as parents, to begin preparing our children for loving what is beautiful, what is good, and at the same time acknowledging that humans aren't always predisposed. I mean, I guess that is why Socrates had to say it. Humans aren't always predisposed to love the best things. Some goods are easy to love. A chocolate bar is easy to love, but the greatest goods are sometimes harder to love. That it's a learned affection. So Brussels sprouts and sweetbreads and red wine instead of grape soda are things that you have to learn to love. And so there are all kinds of analogies and metaphors that we could talk about, that preparing food is a kind of alchemy where you take these disparate elements of the world and put them together and show them to your guests the way that you might show the same kind of disparate elements to your students, and help them make sense of or bring order in their minds to a chaotic world. But at an even more basic level, it's just the opportunity, sitting down to a meal is the opportunity to taste and see that the Lord is good, but not with a long view as well as a short-term pragmatic view. So I want my kids to eat their dinner every night, but I also have to keep in mind that I don't want to be raising a 40-year-old who has to have French fries with every meal. I want a 40-year-old who can eat their carrots, right? or eat peas, or eat whatever might be put in front of them by a host in any given situation, right? In any culture. Because those things ultimately are also coming from the hand of God, and that translates really nicely into what we are trying to get our students to do. There are things that are easy to love in this world and in their lives, but often the classical teacher is working to give them a taste for the best things.
Yes, I think you're quite right, Sean. And I am the father of 3 young children. This month, my oldest will turn 5, and we have one due in September. So 3 going on 4 here. And as a father yourself, perhaps the 2 of us can let's just talk shop for a minute, and maybe some of our listeners, hopefully if we have some older and wiser listeners, they can just send me an email or something, and they can sort us out here.
Yeah, forward that along.
I certainly will. But I'm sure you face the same things that I face day in and day out. And it's interesting for me to see myself going up against the things that I know my parents faced. I remember, as the oldest, I had these memories. I remember the day that it dawned on me that it was terribly rude of me to take my cup or my glass and shake it, shake the ice around it to inform my mother that I needed a refill. But this was something that she constantly would tell us not to do, right? And yet somehow, like, okay, the drink is gone, it is empty, I look at it, I shake it, Mom fills it up, right? And I remember the day, like, it dawned on me, like, oh, now I know why I shouldn't do that. I should say, Mommy, may I please have some more, milk or whatever it is. And yet my children, until very recently, have I've had to tell them day in and day out, what is the right way to ask for more drink or whatever it is. And getting back to this idea of pickiness, children are notorious for saying, well, I don't like that. And I know for a fact, this is the first time it's ever been put in front of them in their little lives, right? Like you've been around for like all of 3 years, and this is the first time I've ever served you this. There's no way on God's green earth that you know that you don't like this.
Right.
So where does that come from? And I don't know, is that part of original sin? I mean, you tell me, where's this innate sort of posture of pickiness come from? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say original sin, but I think, I mean, it's that old. Adam and Eve had a world full of culinary options, and they still insisted on having the one thing they couldn't eat.
Right.
And so I do. I mean, even a sinless human apparently falls prey to that. So I think we are predisposed to it in some way. And so it's something that has to be acknowledged. Like we've talked before, I think we have this little liturgical mantra at our dinner table where our kids know that they're not allowed to say, I don't like something. Because of how dismissive it is, or because it seems like it should grant them permission. It's always said like it should grant them a pass. And so instead they have to say, X food is not my favorite. At which point mom or dad always responds, it doesn't have to be your favorite, but you have to eat it.
Yeah. Oh, well, that just applies to so many areas of life. I find myself very frequently telling my children, my oldest in particular, who's just now starting to, work through, starting to listen, I guess, and realize that, if he listens and obeys and takes heed to my, I'm starting to sound like Solomon, if he will just hearken his ear to my words, right, then life goes much better for him. And this is just the battle that all parents face with their truly weak-willed children, right? We've kind of gotten this thing confused where we think that a child is strong-willed,
right,
when what we're really seeing is a manifestation of a weak will.
Yeah.
And in so many ways, it's our responsibility as parents to help strengthen their will and to help them make good choices, and then also to try certain things, right? So getting back to this, thing that happens at the dinner table on a very regular basis, the child says, well, I don't like that. And I say, well, you've never tried it before, right? I mean, this is just the age-old back and forth, right? And then, of course, the challenge then is to get the child to try it. And 9 times out of 10, unless they've really just set their will against you, they're actually going to enjoy whatever you put in front of them, right? Because I haven't given them a serpent, I haven't given them a stone. It's a piece of bread, or it's a piece of meatloaf or what have you. But I have very vivid memories, as a child of my parents, and this is probably generational, and I'm trying to learn and relearn the things that I need to do at my own dinner table. But I have very many memories of sitting in front of my plate, the last to leave the table. You're not going to get up until you try it. You're going to taste it, right? You're not just going to wholesale dismiss it. And whether that was the right thing to do or not, I guess it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
And really only the parents can know sort of what they're facing in terms of, again, if their child has just set themselves against them, challenging their authority, what have you.
Right.
But, this idea of taste and see is really just saying, try it.
Yeah.
Just try it. And in so many ways in the classroom, I think the good teacher is doing just that, is feasting on the goodness of something in front of his or her students, and then saying, you really should try some of this.
Try some of this.
Yeah. And of course, that sounds beautiful as we talk about it in these sort of metaphorical terms. But I wonder, when you're the child sitting at the dinner table, and it's kind of a forced issue, right? Like you're gonna eat,
Yeah.
or you're gonna go to bed hungry,
Yeah.
or maybe if you're weak-willed enough and your parents are weak-willed enough, they're gonna give in eventually. Or something like
gotta
that.
wait them out.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a bad tactic in some instances, depending on how hard mom and dad's day was. And in the classroom, sometimes the things that we put in front of our students, we lay out this feast.
Yeah.
And it still strikes them as a bit of a forced issue, or it's sort of, I don't know, there's something about the assignedness of it. Is that a word?
Right.
Assignmentness? What do you think about that? I mean, John Sr., someone that I love reading and find myself quoting more and more, and he says that one can no more read a book than one can love a girl on assignment. One can no more read a book on assignment than one can love a girl on assignment.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on there. What can teachers do to maybe lean more into this idea of encouraging children to eat good food and encouraging their students to pursue their studies because we know it's good for them?
Yeah. I think, not to come back to the rest of the question, I don't want to make it sound like I'm passing the buck, but I think that the teacher is often in a difficult place there.
Yeah.
And this comes home to me often because I'm a classroom teacher, but we homeschool our own children. Mm. And so I see the role of teacher and the role of parent very interconnectedly, but also see how the experience of my children or of me as a homeschool parent is very different from the students I teach in school or the parents of those students. And one of the main differences is that there's this kind of disconnect between the two experiences. School often doesn't have to seem like real life in a very meaningful way. I think that the teacher is a bit of a novelty historically. That whether it's the Hebrew Old Testament or whether it's Plato and Aristotle talking about the task of education, it's always this duty that is given to parents. And in the modern world, parents, for a number of reasons, a variety of reasons, contract part of that work to teachers to come along and assist them, but that it's a parental responsibility. And you see that in a different light as you're homeschooling than when you are sending your kids to school. And with my kids at home, and this goes back to the dinner table too, the thing I'm asking of them, I'm embodying for them. Right? When we sit down to dinner, and to your point, right, when you offer a book to students in a classroom, you are reading it too and saying, you should try some of this. This is great. But then at 3 o'clock, a bell rings or doesn't ring, depending on what kind of school you go to, and everybody goes their separate ways. But at home, nothing changes. There's no 3 o'clock. And so they see mom and dad sitting down to the same food that they're sitting down to. And mom and dad also know that this is the sustenance for today. And they see us reading stories with them, reading on our own. And we're, to put it metaphorically, they see us sitting down to our own private meals of Brussels sprouts and carrots and whatever, even when we think they're not looking.
That's right.
And so the teacher has to pray that their students have homes like that, but then do their best to enact that in some smaller way. As the teacher, the ideal is that the teacher is enacting in miniature what life is like at home.
Yeah.
But we really are in that tough place, historically speaking, where we've also been talked out of that.
That's right.
That education is ceded to schools and to teachers. And I mean, that's a big deal in current events right now. People are realizing how deeply that cuts in more than one direction. And so it's a difficult time for that sort of struggle to be sorted out.
Yes, you're right. The same thing can be said of the church, right? There's sort of the youth groupification of the Christian life for the young person, let's say, where in which the parents can take their son or daughter, hand him or her off to the youth minister and say, here you go, their spiritual life is in your hands. Good luck. Send
them back catechized. Yeah.
Exactly, right. And of course, any person who has worked in a ministry of that sort, given enough time, will start to bemoan the sheer absurdity of that, right? It's not Christian, and it's certainly not the biblical mandate in terms of how, as you said, parents are given this responsibility. They extend and let's say mediate that responsibility through other adults, right. Certainly, but not in this wholesale sort of, okay, well, we'll just compartmentalize this part of their life. And it sounds absurd when we think about it in terms of Christianity, although it happens, and maybe we're hopefully moving out of that trend. But you're quite right to describe it as equally absurd in the realm of any other type of education, being led out of ignorance, right? And in part, parents often find themselves. It can go the other way too, right? When the teacher thinks that his or her domain within their subject, let's say, extends into the home in such a way that, I, as your math teacher, can give you 30 problems to do tonight. And that may mean you and mom or you and dad sitting up at the kitchen table late into the night, right. Tears flowing off into the floor. But you got to do your math problems. Yeah. And so we do this to each other back and forth, right? Teachers sort of giving responsibility over to the parents that they should be taken care of in the school, and vice versa. Anyways, all of this, as you say, is sort of coming to a head. And in part, I hope that the work we do through this podcast will at least encourage people who find themselves in this position, teachers tasked with the very hard work of sometimes, they're the only ones putting these good things in front of the student. Yeah. And that can be a tough spot to be in. So that's why I always encourage parents when they come into a parent-teacher conference to practice the art of narration in their own homes. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that that's one of the simplest ways that a parent can engage with his or her child. So as a history teacher, I tell my parents, at the very least, and you don't want, the old Seinfeld joke, you don't want to do the very least, but if you're going to do anything, at the very least, ask your child, not just what did you study in history today, but can you tell me the story? Right. And if they can do that, then that's going to start, hopefully, a conversation that will go much further, because they're practicing this in the classroom. They should be very well equipped to tell back, not word for word, but point by point, the story that they heard in their history class or literature class or any other class for that matter. And then you just lean in and ask good questions just to keep the conversation going. Yeah. And I think parents will be delighted to find that goes a lot further than just, how was your day, or what did you learn at school today? Something like that.
And that anyone can do it. The I think in my Circe talk that you mentioned, I made reference to one of my favorite authors, Robert Capon, who was an Anglican priest and cookbook author, which seems like a marriage made in heaven. But he has this wonderful discussion of the task of the amateur, and he acknowledges the normal, the generally understood connotation of the word, but then points to its root meaning, that the amateur is the lover. And that can be such a comfort to parents who are in this position where they feel some lack of expertise. Well, I'm not a teacher, or, oh, I didn't have a classical education, or I don't know how I can be of much help here. But that you don't need to be a professional anything. And homeschool parents are in the same situation often, especially in the last few years, when many people have found themselves thrown into it or embraced it out of kind of desperation, that the amateur loves, and that God willing comes natural to everyone, and that the task of the amateur is simply to love things, to love the world as it's come from God, and that you can show your children how to love, partly by simply loving them, but then asking them to tell you the story is its own sort of declaration and demonstration of love. I love you, and I love what you're learning, and then you can take it from there. Let them see you loving other things. It's very much what we talk about the teacher trying to do in front of their students. And the secret is you don't you don't need any sort of pedigree to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, one of the things that homeschool parents have to their benefit is, well, the fact that they are operating in both of those roles simultaneously, and oftentimes enter into that out of a desire, in some part, for a remedial education of their own. Mm-hmm. They're just so thrilled that they can go back and relive sort of the missed Mother Goose stories, or the early elementary readers, or what have you.
Right.
Or frankly, just because of the state of education for the last 100 years or so, probably get the high school education that they missed out on.
Yeah.
And in so doing, go alongside their child and be happy to be a co-learner with them. And the thing that puts them, in the role of a teacher, of course, is the fact that God has given them that mandate, and they have, been further down the road of life, wisdom and practical, well, I guess practical knowledge, in so much as it comes out as wisdom that they can apply in their reading of these things and in the working out and the application of these subjects with their student. And I would just hope that the classroom teacher would consider the opportunity to approach things with a beginner's mindset, or to be refreshed, as it were, each and every school year, so that it doesn't become, okay, well, Mr. Bailey or Mr. Johnson has all the answers pertaining to literature, and so I'm going to go and I'm going to sit in this class, and he's going to give me all the answers, and I'm going to give him what he's looking for. No. It's much more of a thing we're doing together, in which I would hope that the teacher would be able to, if truly being refreshed in his or her studies and teaching, show that.
Yeah.
In behind the lectern or at the desk, and at the same time be stumped in front of the students and let them see what it looks like to work your way out of that.
That's right. Yeah.
I think this isn't original to me, but something I've read on teaching suggested that the student actually mistrusts the teacher who has never who's never stumped,
Right.
or somehow acts as if he or she has it all figured out.
Because inevitably you're lying.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so, I teach middle school boys primarily, and so I have some students that I think believe that I do know everything about history, and the temptation is just to sort of keep up that that show, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's so much more fun to just admit what you don't know and then see the students not be really disappointed or not be upset, but then, just walk with you. We have a very small school, so right next door we have our library. I'm like, I don't know, let's go look it up, right? Or I'll have to get back to you on that, right?
Right.
I mean, it's what I was taught as a very young man working in a grocery store. If a customer came to you and said, do you know where such and such is? No, but I'll certainly find out for you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the teacher can do the same thing and can model what it looks like in that way to be a student.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, let's shift gears here for a minute and let's talk about film, because this is another interest of yours.
Yeah.
And I have read some of your work through a website called Filmfisher. Maybe tell us a little bit about that project and how you came to it, and perhaps why you took an interest in reviewing films, and maybe in so doing talk about your history with film and how you developed a love for it.
Sure. I'll probably bounce around between those questions, but the Filmfisher is a fantastic film review site that's very much staffed by classical thinkers, I think is a fair way to put it. It was originally a project of Christopher Perrin's, and I came to it through my friend and colleague Joshua Gibbs, who Perrin had tapped to run the site and be the editor, and so it's actually been some time since I published anything for them, but it was a really enjoyable period, and I continue to write about film as I have occasions. Film has meant as much to me in my life and education as literature has, for good or for ill. I really came to classical education really in college, or I learned of it as a high schooler and discovered that it was the thing that I wasn't getting and wanted. And but in the meantime, I had really I had a subpar education that I had made up with trips to the library and the bookstore, and I would just sort of I would wander the classic section and just pull books based on name recognition. So, which is very much a kind of dangerous, I think probably a dangerous approach. It's by God's grace that it didn't do more harm than it did. But so the same was true of movies. I remember when we still had video stores, and you could just go and browse the shelves and pull down movies, and just about any movie that had ever been made was on the shelf in a decent video store.
That's right. I mean, it used to be quite the event, to go and get a movie on likely a Friday night, right? I mean,
right.
Who had time back then, to watch movies during the week? I mean, what that's something you did on, in your leisure time on the weekends. But now, of course, we we have these streaming services, and I'm sure you have some thoughts on how that has changed our relationship to film.
Sure.
We're probably, here we are, us two old guys, right? We're the last of the old guard in terms of going to the old Blockbuster. In fact, I lived in Alaska years ago, and in Fairbanks, we had, or was it in Anchorage? I can't remember. I think it was Fairbanks. We had the last Blockbuster in the nation.
Wow.
And it closed while I lived there, and it was like going back in time.
Yeah.
To go there, but it was an event. You went and maybe they had what you're looking for. Maybe they were all checked out.
That's right.
You just had to go and find out what was on the shelf.
And there was a lot at stake because you were walking out with one movie, and that was it. If it was disappointing, that was the movie you had at home.
That's right. Oh, yep. Mom and Dad. Yeah, this movie is a lot raunchier than I expected. I guess we're not watching a movie tonight. Going to bed early.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's no just clicking back a page and making another selection. And so the movies were like a second literature to me growing up, and again, for better or ill, mostly ill maybe, but it was part of my introduction to story and the love of story and human drama. Thinking back a few minutes to that idea of homeschool parents sort of getting their own remedial education. That is certainly my experience. I've been a classical teacher for the better part of 13 years, and there are still things that I encounter as we educate our own children that I just never had or never experienced. Great classic stories and literature, and even before that, I was a high schooler before I read The Hobbit or The Chronicles of Narnia. And I was older than that before I really came to a deep understanding of Grimm's fairy tales. And so I made up some of that deficiency through my experience with film. And so I do love it as a kind of modern medium of storytelling. My master's thesis at the University of Dallas was on the novels of Graham Greene, who was both a troubled but profound Catholic writer and often also a screenwriter. And so those things come together pretty easily in my mind. That's what has given me such pleasure in writing about film, and that I'm mostly a writer of reviews or of critical essays, and whether it's film or books or even food, I think that task of praising something well is the same. Convincing someone that something is lovable, worth loving.
Yeah. Yes, the art of writing the encomium. In order to, that's something I'm working through. This word is in my mind because I'm teaching middle school boys right now how to write in praise of something.
That's right.
And they're mostly looking forward to writing the vituperation,
which are easier and more.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
And in some ways more fun. You mentioned Josh Gibbs, and when I was teaching high school, I used a format that he put together for writing reviews, and I used that really as the basis of all essays that I had my high schoolers in my American literature class write, because I wanted them to sort of, I guess, break out of some habits that they had formed, let's say, and this is how you write a book report, or this is how you write about a book. And I wanted them to think more about how they would write about a meal that they really enjoyed, or a film that they really enjoyed, because those things we tend to, speaking of narrations, we narrate these things just out of a sheer love of the thing that we enjoyed, right? We come out of the movie theater and we want to tell somebody about it, or we have that experience at the restaurant, and we say, if you're ever in town, you need to go eat here.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are things that I would like them to kind of enter into that mode when they think about the book that they've been reading together. And so I think that's a good practice to get into. Before I forget, I didn't realize that Graham Greene wrote for movies. Are there any that we recognize, or are there any that ever went to production?
Yeah, in fact, he really, when he realized that writing novels was never going to pay the bills, or at least he assumed, he really started writing novels that could be easily adapted to the screen. And he wrote a few novels with that express purpose in mind, and ended up cashing in. But sometimes there was this perfect marriage of high art and popular cinematic appeal. And so his best known probably is The Third Man with Orson Welles. Carol Reed directed, and it's phenomenal. And that one in particular, Greene wrote really the film treatment and then turned it into a novel. And so he very much had the ultimate film in mind. But he worked in his day job as a movie reviewer for many years. And so a lot of cinematic elements work their way into even his narration in his fiction. Another one that I love is the film adaptation of his novel Our Man in Havana, about this accidental British spy who's a vacuum salesman in Cuba who gets roped into spying for the British government. And the character is played by Alec Guinness in the movie, and he's just phenomenal. It's one of his more comedic roles. And even though we don't often remember Guinness as a comedic actor, he's so good in that role. So there's some great films.
Well, I have a few things to add to my to-watch list. I wonder, this act of reviewing films or food, just writing reviews, is this something that you would commend to any young person who is, well, I don't want to ask too much of a leading question. Would you recommend it? And if so, why?
I absolutely would. And it's often when I found myself teaching writing classes over the years, it's often an activity that we spend a good deal of time on. So when I was taught sixth grade one year, and we did progymnosmata and comium writing was a big part of that. And even there, I would have them. We had a curriculum that we used where they were praising wise sayings and historical figures, but I would also just have them praise things that they liked, praise their favorite food or praise their favorite book or movie. And what we always talked about, or what I commended to them, was praising in a way that is not empty or that is not flattery, but praising in a way that convinces someone else to embrace it. And so I would commend that to everybody, again, because I think that's partly the task of every human. And and articulating our love, or trying to interrogate without being too clinical about it, but looking at or thinking through the reasons that we have for loving things can be helpful, even in strengthening and encouraging our own loves. Our task is to love the world and love it into loveliness, and bring others along in that task. And so any small practice in that is really great.
Perhaps one of the ways we can connect what we were saying earlier about, trying to get young children in particular to eat things that we know are good for them. And then this idea now of producing things that, praising good things, right?
Yeah.
I'm reminded of that idea of the bee, right? Who goes out and collects the pollen, and then through the collection of this pollen and through a process of digesting it, makes honey.
Mm.
And of course, this is an idea that medieval Christians latched onto, and you'll see bees depicted in manuscripts and connected with this idea of, what's the Latin phrase I'm searching for?
The Lectio Divina.
Lectio Divina. Thank you. And yes, I think this is, again, something we need to be reminded of. This is a part of our tradition. This is a way we have thought about how we should operate in the world, where there's so many good things to feast on, to collect, and to digest or to meditate on. And then we ought to rightfully give praise, and there's a hierarchy of that praise. Ultimately, all praise is directed upward towards God, right? And so the student in the classroom who is learning to praise, as you said, wise sayings, or to praise the book that has been given them to read, is practicing something that in its ultimate expression ought to come forth as prayer, as a praise to God.
That's right.
And if we can initiate our students into that and let them practice it, then I think that's a very noble task and very much worthwhile.
Yeah, and if education can be seen in that way, then it has a far better chance of working. There's a English professor, an Italian immigrant named Angelo Pellegrini. He wrote this book called The Unprejudiced Palette. And he tells this anecdote about children who came and families who came from the old world. And he grew up the son and grandson of these laborers who worked in vineyards. And these families and children who came from the old world, they were so used to they were so used to wine as a part of their daily life. Children, as early as they could stand, as soon as they were off milk, wine with dinner was a given. And then he tells stories about these families who come to America, and which is far more puritanical about those matters. And the entire role of, for lack of a better word, alcoholic beverages was subsumed out of the home life and became a topic of discussion in health class at school. Right? This is an unhealthy thing, stay away from it. Yes. And so then the children would go home and they would be teetotalers. But then they would go off to college or the professional world. And he's speaking about the mid 20th century, where then the pendulum would swing the other way, and it was this means to the end of pleasure. And so the new norm was overindulgence, and but that for these immigrants, when they would see these two extremes, both would astonish them, because it was this clinical treatment of this impersonal and pragmatic treatment of a thing that they had only ever known as festal, as the kind of lifeblood of existence, as they took it for granted, the way they took eating breakfast and lunch and dinner for granted. And it was in that enculturation at the table that they developed this lifelong proper love of the thing. And that is really it's a great metaphor for education. If it's this central thing that is not not existing in our lives for a limited time to serve a pragmatic end, but at the heart of what we are about as people, then the fruit of what we're doing is going to carry on into eternity.
Yes, I think enculturation is a good word. I was recently tasked with talking through some of these things with my middle school boys, and we had a couple of days discussion related to alcohol. And the thing that I encouraged them to do was, first and foremost, recognize that there is a culture within your home that pertains to all the things we're talking about, namely alcohol. And you just pull the room, and things vary, right?
Right.
You have your teetotalers, you have your social drinkers, and then you have the kid in the class whose family has been affected by alcoholism.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of variations along the theme there. And so the thing I wanted to encourage them to do was, first and foremost, recognize that there is a culture within their family, and to then be thoughtful about that culture. And if they've been initiated into a culture that relates to drinking that is in line with the larger Christian culture,
Mm-hmm.
then they should, especially while they are living under the roof and under the rules of their family, honor that.
Mm-hmm.
and then be very thoughtful and intentional about what you do when you branch out on your own and you establish your own household, or you find yourself living by yourself, for that matter. And then you really have to be thoughtful about, okay, well, what did mom and dad or grandma and grandpa or whoever it is, what did they model for me? What did they give me? And I just don't need to throw that out in the window because my buddy over here is trying to get me to do something different.
Right.
And so it seems to me that that's the only way to approach it now. I think if you and I had our druthers, we would love to see, let's say perhaps, probably what you and I would consider a more historical or I don't know, for lack of a better word, and this is going to make me sound terribly pretentious, nuanced way of thinking about alcohol. But at the very least, just be thoughtful about it, right? And know that, if you have parents who love you, they're going to teach you certain things that are for your benefit and for your safety and for your well-being. And, if that means swearing something off, then that means swearing it off until you're at a point where you can make those decisions for yourself, hopefully being informed by the wisdom of your family and forefathers.
Yeah, while it might strike us as unfortunate in some cases, to commend the option of swearing the thing off. It's a great test of your thinking about the thing. So everything, going back to taste, in cultivating taste in children, it's easy to confuse taste with being pretentious, or taste with decadence. But there's this, you're kind of trying to avoid the extremes, both of decadence and indifference as you cultivate taste. If we're indifferent to something, it has no value to us. But if we become decadent in our use of a thing, we've also missed the point, which, as you said earlier, is ultimately to point to God. And sometimes whether the ability to swear it off can be a test of, or a testament to its value rather than our opposition to it. Think of the monastic tradition, the swearing off of marital bonds is not necessarily a testimony of condemnation. It's not to despise the thing that you have sworn off, perhaps for some higher purpose.
I think that's well said, Sean. I want to circle back to movies in sort of the as our time nears an end here. I wonder, as a father of young children in particular, do you have any films that you recommend people share with their families? You know, I guess on one extreme, you know, we could quote John Sr. where he says, you know, we should just smash our televisions, and there's that. But and then of course, you know, you have the children that are raised by the television.
Right.
Is there a way for us to be thoughtful and intentional about things like film, for example, which I've found, just as a personal anecdote, you know, when I decided to get rid of, you know, the subscription services and whatnot, and just get some DVDs, I found that my children will watch the same movie over and over again with great delight. And I don't have to worry about what's going to come up next, or that it's going to keep, you know, playing past the point of, you know, how those services are set up to just keep streaming.
Yeah.
You know, do you have any movies that you recommend that families watch together?
Yeah, and I'd say that partly to your concern, even before you get to the point of deciding what movie to watch, so much is communicated to your children about when and how you watch them.
Yeah.
Our television is like our ironing board. It is not the centerpiece of an altar that we've set up in like the large room in our house. We stick it away and we pull it out when the occasion calls for it. Right? It's not mounted above the mantle like the Romans would have mounted their ancestral gods and or what have you. And so that immediately speaks symbolically to what we think is the significance or the importance of it. Is not a central thing in our life.
Yes.
It is ancillary, much like the ironing board. When you got a wrinkly shirt, get it out. But if we put the ironing board in the middle of our dining room and left it there all the time, it would be weird. And then yeah, we and I want to say this, it's very possible this piece of advice came from somebody like Josh Gibbs, but for a long time we have been really intentional about minimizing the number of cartoons that we show our kids, just because of the medium itself is one that gives us pause. Not that it's evil, and we do show our kids animated movies, but that a steady diet of that seems like it could be counterproductive to the imagination, or just the taste for, again, real things. And so we give preference to older films, especially films that were made before the mid 1960s, when the Hays Code was sort of legislating morality in movies. And so even a cold viewing is fairly safe, but we usually, I don't think we've ever shown our kids a movie we haven't seen first. And so movies that are very much like fairy tales in that they can lionize or even exaggerate the virtues. A lot of Westerns are really great about that. So we've shown our kids High Noon, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and they love Charlie Chaplin movies, and the entire idea of the film being Charlie Chaplin movies, silent films in particular, are so different from literature in that they rely so much on motion. And so the physical comedy of those films is really great, and the kids love it, but it's not celebrating or inculcating any kind of vice. And then we do have a few, most of the animated films that we show our kids are Pixar films. WALL-E is a movie that we watch quite a bit, which I always argue to my wife is just loosely based on the Divine Comedy. and then we watch Ratatouille, which is very much in our wheelhouse. And we haven't shown them The Incredibles, but Brad Bird is the director of both of those movies, Ratatouille and The Incredibles, and both are these great takedowns simultaneously of egalitarianism, that everyone is the same and everyone gets a trophy and everyone is special, but also exceptionalism. So back to that kind of decadence and indifference distinction, that thinking of yourself too highly is as problematic as thinking of everybody as equally gifted, and both of those movies do a great job of revealing that, or pulling back the curtain on those issues.
Well, thank you for those recommendations, and thank you also for touching on, the way that you show films in your house. And I think that your description there will help a lot of people. And if they can find ways to decenter that giant black screen, right? And like you said, put it away and bring it out on occasions where, again, you're making a very intentional choice to put this thing in front of you, versus it always just being there or running in the background.
Right. And to circle back, even one of the principles in choosing the movies that we show is very much like our discussion, or our principle of how we feed our children. So much children's entertainment today it's really insulting. It just really talks down to or treats children as very stupid and vapid. And so in the same way that you want to feed them in a way that will make them competent 40-year-olds who aren't embarrassing at a dinner party, you want to feed them entertainment that is similar, not heady psychological thrillers, but things that treat them seriously as humans, and that they might not get everything or appreciate everything, but they're watching with you, and it's understood that this is something I grew up into.
Mm-hmm. Two more questions for you, Sean, and then we're going to end our show here. What is one meal, let's say, that you would recommend parents fix for the whole family? And I'm wondering, could you give us something that, I don't know, let's say might not be the most popular thing in the world, but it's probably something people should be eating?
One meal whole family should be eating. Adrian says sushi. I think that's a great answer. And we do, that's one of the things that we have worked with our kids on. They love to make sushi at home, so we do that quite a bit. It's textures and tastes that are often foreign to us. And so I would say that's probably, it is. It can be beautiful, and it requires a lot of patience and a very sharp knife. And probably foreign cuisines of any kind would be on that list. Some kind of stir fry. And so it may be different based on the experience of an individual family. So I would say a meal that would stretch the whole family and stretch them together. So go to the local Asian grocery store and pick something from the produce aisle that none of you recognize, and figure out how to prepare it and how to eat it. And again, just like the student seeing the teacher struggle with a book or experience their own ignorance in a subject, the mom and the dad training their own palate, or taking at least the risk on something new or unusual is a good thing to see and experience. So maybe that's a cop-out, but that would be probably what I would recommend.
I think that's great advice, Sean. Our final question, as is our habit on this show, I would like to ask you if you could either share a favorite quote of yours, something that has stuck with you and informs your life on a regular basis, or perhaps maybe you have a book recommendation for us, something that you wish you had read earlier in your life that you would like to recommend to our listeners.
Maybe I can quickly offer both. I think they probably go together. One of the books that I came to early enough that it really was formative for me was G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, which is in its own way about education, sort of his own wayward, self-guided education into the faith. And he says at one point, he commends asking of any man if he is pagan enough to die for the world and Christian enough to die to it. And that is a sort of dichotomy or principle, a contradiction that I think about a lot. I realize just as I'm saying it that's a theme that has come up probably in our conversation today. That both this great love of the world, the way that the pagan might love the world enough to die for it, but also this understanding that those loves point to something higher than the world and have to transcend the world. And so you must also be Christian enough to die to the world. But the great, glorious promise of God is that those who die to the world have it given back to them in the end. Right? And then on a related note, I think one of the books, or maybe a book by an author that I wish I had discovered much earlier is Beauty for Truth's Sake by Stratford Caldecott, which is, it's a companion to his book Beauty in the Word, but Beauty for Truth's Sake is largely a meditation on the nature of beauty, and then also how it relates to the arts of the quadrivium in particular. And that is a whole topic and train of thought that I just enamored of and wish I had opened up to me long ago when I was a student in high school, hating or at least feeling like geometry had no purpose or value. And I've had, by God's mercy, come to see how mistaken that was, but I really had no one trying to convince me otherwise, except to say, you might use this in work one day. So Beauty for Truth's Sake would be the book that I would highly, highly commend.
Wonderful. Well, Sean Johnson, you've been very generous with your time, and I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. There I am with the puns again. All right, it's quitting time. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. We invite you to experience the art of teaching through interactive learning communities at our Patreon page. Visit patreon.com/classical education. Also, be sure to join the conversation on our Facebook community at facebook.com/groups/classical education. We are a listener-supported podcast, so your support makes this podcast possible. As the great artist and educator John Ruskin once wrote, "Well, my friends, the final result of the education I want you to give your children will be, in a few words, this. They will know what it is to see the sky. They will know what it is to breathe it. And they will know, best of all, what it is to behave under it, as in the presence of a Father who is in heaven."